My name is Marina Lockhart, 34 years old. I used to believe weddings softened people, like a gentler light that made families remember how to be kind. I'd watched my cousins get married, seen aunts crying into tissues, uncles pretending not to be emotional, kids running with cake on their faces while everyone told the same stories and laughed. It was messy, but it was loving. I never expected my family to turn into a fairy tale, but I did think they could manage decent, respectful, maybe even quietly proud. I didn't know that the night before my wedding, I'd be kneeling on my childhood bedroom floor, surrounded by the shredded remains of every dress I owned. The day before the ceremony started calmly. I'd flown home from Virginia 2 weeks earlier, wrapping up a stretch of work on base that was demanding but routine. My leave had been approved without fuss. David, my fiancé, was staying with his parents a few blocks from the old white steeple church where we planned to get married. From the outside, everything looked like a postcard. Mid-June sunshine, church bells marking the hour, neighbors mowing lawns, children shrieking through sprinklers. Even my parents seemed slightly muted. Not warm, but not openly hostile. For my family, that almost counted as progress. By late afternoon, I was at the kitchen table with my mother, a cooling mug of coffee near my hand, while she shuffled through a clipboard of lists. She asked about times and head counts without really looking at me. My father moved in and out of the room, opening the refrigerator, letting cabinet doors slam, grunting in my direction instead of saying hello. He spoke to my mother about seating and food as though I were a client, not a daughter. My younger brother, Kyle, sat at the other end of the table glued to his phone, laughing too loudly at videos I couldn't see. Every so often he tossed a remark about me, playing officer at the reception, or saluting the cake. He said it like a joke, but his eyes watched my face for a crack. No one told him to stop. The air in that kitchen felt thick, full of words none of us were willing to say. I felt the old tightness in my chest, the one that had followed me since I was a teenager, realizing I would never be the child they bragged about. Still, I kept telling myself not to overreact. I had spent years swallowing comments, trading my silence for short-lived peace. Maybe the wedding would push them toward their better selves for one weekend. Hope doesn't check the past. It just keeps talking. Around 6, I went upstairs to my old room to check on my dresses. 4 hung in a neat row: a satin A-line, a lace mermaid, a simple crepe gown, and a vintage dress I'd found in a small Chesapeake boutique. I unzipped one bag a few inches, brushed my fingers over the bodice, and pictured myself at the front of the church, music playing, David waiting. For a moment, there was a light, fizzy feeling in my chest. I let myself believe. Dinner was stiff but uneventful. My mother hovered over Kyle, refilling his plate and laughing at his stories as if he were the one getting married. My father barely spoke, except for a pointed comment about real work when I mentioned heading back to base after the honeymoon. I let it go. I had let worse go. By 9, I escaped upstairs again, claiming I needed sleep. David called to say goodnight. His voice was steady, warm, familiar in a way my parents had never been. "Whatever they do," he said quietly, "I'll be waiting at the altar." It was simple, but it settled something in me. I fell asleep believing that, awkward or not, the next morning would still end in a wedding. Sometime around 2 in the morning, I woke to a soft, deliberate sound. The faint scrape of footsteps in the hallway and the quiet click of my bedroom door easing shut. For a moment, half asleep, I told myself it was nothing. Old houses creak, people get water, pipes complain. I lay still and listened. The silence that followed felt wrong, like a held breath. There was a faint smell in the air that hadn't been there before, a mix of disturbed fabric and dust. Unease slid down my spine. I pushed back the covers, sat up, and turned on the lamp. Yellow light spilled across the room and landed on the row of garment bags. They weren't hanging the way I'd left them. One sagged at the bottom in a strange, heavy shape. Another zipper was crooked, not fully closed. My heartbeat sharpened, each thud too loud in my ears. I stood, my feet sinking into the old carpet, and walked toward the dresses, every step slower than the last. I grabbed the zipper of the first bag and pulled. The sound of metal teeth separating seemed far too loud. Inside, the satin A-line dress had been sliced straight across the bodice, the skirt hanging in ragged strips where the scissors had wandered. For a second, my mind refused to process what I was seeing. Then my hands moved on their own, yanking open the next bag. The lace mermaid was shredded down the back, its delicate pattern hanging in tatters. Third bag, cut. Fourth bag, destroyed. 4 dresses in ruins, white fabric sagging like something wounded and discarded. My knees hit the floor before I realized I had fallen. I knelt in a ring of ragged silk and lace, fingers buried in fabric that, a few hours earlier, had represented choices and futures and versions of myself I hadn't even chosen yet. A floorboard creaked behind me. I turned my head toward the doorway. My father stood there, framed by the dim hallway light. My mother hovered just behind his shoulder, arms folded tight across her chest. Kyle leaned against the doorframe, phone still in his hand, eyes flicking from my face to the ruined dresses. None of them looked surprised. They looked like people inspecting a finished job. My father's face was oddly calm. "You deserved it," he said quietly, as if he were stating the weather. "You walk around in that uniform like you're better than this family, better than your brother, better than us." The words were soft, but they landed like a punch. I had heard insults from strangers in more than one language, but nothing had ever sounded like my own father explaining why I deserved to have my future cut to pieces. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. My throat felt tight, my tongue heavy. My mother stared somewhere over my head, refusing to meet my eyes. Kyle's smirk had faded, but he didn't step forward. He didn't step away either. He just watched. "Get some sleep," my father added, as if any part of this night could be soothed by rest. "The wedding's off." He turned and walked down the hall without waiting for a response. My mother followed. Kyle lingered for half a heartbeat, shoulders shifting like he might say something, then pushed himself off the frame and disappeared after them. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone with the wreckage. For a long moment, I didn't move. The shredded dresses lay around me like shed skin, every torn piece proof that someone I shared blood with had picked up scissors and gone to work. I waited for sobs that never came. Instead, beneath the shock and the old, raw hurt, something quieter began to rise. The same part of me that had stood steady in places far more dangerous than this house. They had destroyed fabric. They had shown me exactly who they were. They had also reminded me who I had become without their help. Sitting on that bedroom floor, surrounded by ruined white, I understood that this was not the end of anything. It was the moment I started deciding what came next, with or without them. For a long time after the door shut, I didn't move. I sat in the middle of my childhood bedroom, surrounded by shredded silk and lace, the lamp casting long shadows across the floor like pieces of a life I was no longer willing to beg for. My hands rested on my knees, palms open, as if my body was waiting for my mind to catch up. Anger didn't come. Tears didn't come. What rose instead was a deep, vibrating clarity, quiet, sharp, unshakable. I had been through worse. Maybe not this kind of betrayal, but I'd lived through nights far colder than this one. Nights filled with alarms, commands, danger, loss. I'd faced death in foreign countries and mourning ceremonies on bases where flags flew half-mast. Pain wasn't new. But there was something uniquely cruel about sitting in the same room where I once did homework and packed for boot camp, realizing the people who raised me had just tried to break me in the most intimate way they could imagine. Around 3 a.m., my body finally responded. I stood slowly, brushing torn fabric off my legs. My knees ached from kneeling so long against the floor. I inhaled deeply, exhaled through my teeth, and felt the steadiness settle in my bones with each breath. The dresses were unsalvageable. Even if I had a team of seamstresses waiting in the hallway, there was no fixing the jagged cuts running through each gown. My father had made sure of that. Maybe he thought destroying those dresses would somehow destroy me. Maybe he thought cutting silk could cut my resolve. But all it did was show me exactly what century-old patterns I was about to leave behind. I wiped my palms against my thighs, grabbed my suitcase from under the bed, and started packing. Not frantically, not angrily, methodically. The way years of training had taught me when preparing for long deployments or sudden movements. I folded each item with precision. My heels, toiletries, the folder containing the ceremony paperwork, the small wooden frame holding a photo of David laughing at something I'd said, and the card he'd written for me before the trip. On its front, in his familiar handwriting, was a line I'd reread dozens of times. Whatever tomorrow looks like, I'll be waiting. I placed it gently inside the bag. Then I turned toward the back of my closet, past old boxes, worn shoes, high school memorabilia I had stopped caring about the year I left home. My fingers found the zipper of a garment bag I hadn't opened since my last inspection. I unzipped it just enough to see the crisp whiteness inside. My dress whites, freshly pressed, every ribbon aligned, every medal earned, every thread representing something I had fought for, not something I had been gifted or handed or guilted into. The uniform wasn't flashy. It wasn't princess-like or delicate, but as I held it, the weight of it steadied me. That uniform had survived storms, deployments, loss, and triumph. And it represented a version of myself my parents had never once acknowledged, but could never take credit for. Maybe they thought the dresses were my identity. They had forgotten the uniform existed. They had forgotten what I'd earned. They had forgotten who I'd become. By 4 a.m., the house was still silent as I carried my bag downstairs. A single lamp in the living room glowed faintly. My mother must have left it on, maybe imagining I'd come down sobbing, begging for forgiveness, asking what I could do to fix things, but there was nothing left in me to fix for them. I opened the front door quietly and stepped outside into the cool, early morning air. The sky was dark, but a thin blue line hugged the horizon. Dew sparkled on the grass. The street was still. The world felt untouched, waiting, as if holding its breath for the next choice I would make. I climbed into my car, started the engine, and let the hum of it calm the trembling in my chest. I didn't know exactly where to go, but my body did. Instinct moved me like muscle memory. I drove toward base. As the gate came into view, the young guard on duty straightened when he recognized me. His eyes widened, not in judgment, not in suspicion, but in concern and respect. "Ma'am," he said quietly, stepping forward. "Everything all right?" My voice felt rough, scraped raw. "Just needed to clear my head," I managed. He nodded slowly, like he understood more than I said. "Welcome back, ma'am." Inside the base, most buildings were dark. A few security lights cast long shadows across the pavement. The flagpole near the main courtyard stood tall, the stars and stripes rippling lightly in the wind as though acknowledging my arrival. I parked near the administrative wing and stepped out, the gravel crunching under my shoes. A voice called out from behind me. "Couldn't sleep either?" I turned to see Master Chief Hollander emerging from the shadows with a cup of burnt base coffee in his hand. He had the kind of face time had carved lines into, but the eyes of someone who saw right through people. He looked at me quietly, letting the silence do what words couldn't. "Rough night?" he asked, gentle but direct. My throat tightened. I had never cried in front of him before, or broken down, or even let him see me shaken. But something unlatched inside me. "My parents destroyed my dresses," I whispered. "All of them." He blinked once, slowly, and for a moment I thought he'd be shocked. But instead, his jaw set in the resigned way people look when the world disappoints them one more time. He didn't ask why. He didn't tell me to calm down or rationalize it. He simply said, "Families can be cruel in ways strangers never will." I stared at the pavement. I don't know what to do next. He nodded toward the garment bag in my trunk, the one containing my dress whites. "Sure you do. You came here." I frowned. "What does that mean?" He took a step closer. "That uniform isn't something you wear. It's something you earned. Every stripe, every ribbon, every late night, every hard call." His voice softened with a kind of tired pride. "They cut your dresses because they thought that was all you had, but they can't touch that uniform, and they sure as hell can't touch those stars." A shaky laugh escaped me, half relief, half disbelief. He'd always had a way of cutting through things, slicing directly to the truth with quiet precision. "Go get ready," he said, patting my shoulder once. "The world should see who you really are." I drove to the small guest quarters and stepped inside. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and worn carpet, but it was safe, neutral, mine for the moment. I hung my uniform on the hook near the door and began preparing with the same care I'd used before major inspections and important ceremonies. Shoes polished, ribbons aligned, hair pulled back. Each movement steadied me more than the last. When I finally stepped into the uniform, the fabric hugged my shoulders with familiar weight. I fastened the last button and looked in the mirror. Gone was the broken bride. Gone was the daughter. begging for what she would never receive. Standing there was a woman who had earned every inch of her place in the world, someone they couldn't shrink, someone they would not break. By sunrise, soft golden light spilled across my shoulders, illuminating the metals and catching on the ribbons like the universe reminding me I had survived nights far darker. I gathered my things, stepped outside, and closed the door behind me. The base felt quiet, respectful, steady. My heart matched its rhythm. I checked the time, 7:30. The ceremony would start at 10. Guests would arrive by 9:30. I still had time, but I didn't intend to hide. I wanted to walk into that church before the rumors, before the lies, before my parents tried to spin a new story. Truth doesn't need defending. It just needs a place to stand. I got into my car, adjusting the seat to keep my uniform crisp. As I drove out of the base and toward town, the early morning sun warmed the windshield. Houses appeared slowly along the road, dogs stretching in driveways, older couples beginning their walks, sprinklers coming to life. The world was normal, steady. But I carried the storm, and I was done letting it control me. As the church came into view, familiar cars in the lot, guests milling outside, laughter drifting on the summer air, I tightened my hands on the wheel just once. Then I parked. I stepped out, and the world around me fell silent. The moment my shoes touched the pavement, conversations around the church entrance thinned into a strange, rippling hush. People turned, first casually, then sharply, as if trying to make sense of something their minds had no frame for. Dress whites weren't subtle. In the morning sun, the fabric glowed with a crisp, unmistakable authority. The ribbons caught light like small shards of memory and sacrifice, and suddenly every whisper seemed to freeze in the summer air. For a heartbeat, no one recognized me. Then someone near the back of the crowd squinted, leaned toward their husband, and whispered my name. Heads tilted, eyes widened. A wave of recognition moved across the parking lot, slow and stunned, like a curtain being drawn back. Older men straightened reflexively, the way former service members always do when faced with a uniform that outranks their past. Older women pressed hands to their chests, their faces softening into a compassion far truer than anything I'd grown up with. Younger guests stared openly, caught somewhere between awe and confusion. And as I walked forward, every step deliberate, I felt a kind of stillness settle over me, a quiet power humming beneath my skin. David's mother reached me first. Her silver hair glimmered under the sun, her eyes warm and trembling. She took one look at my uniform, then another at my expression, and pulled me into her arms without hesitation. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, voice breaking in the middle. "What did they do to you?" It wasn't a question. It was recognition. Understanding. Maybe someone had told her part of what happened, or maybe she simply knew a mother's cruelty when she saw it. I swallowed hard, unable to speak. She squeezed my arms gently, letting me go only when she sensed I had steadied myself again. A soft, familiar quiet fell beside me. David. He didn't ask where I'd been or what happened. He didn't look at me with pity or panic. He simply breathed out and touched the edge of my collar with the reverence of someone touching something sacred. "You look like yourself," he murmured, voice low and certain. "I'm proud of you." I felt something inside me loosen, just a fraction, like a knot untying after years of tightness. He offered me his arm. My fingers brushed his for a moment, but I shook my head gently. There were things I needed to do on my own first. He nodded immediately. No confusion, no hesitation, just unwavering trust. "You tell me when you're ready," he said. "I'll be right here." I walked toward the chapel doors alone, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes following me, not with mockery, not with pity, but with a quiet, stunned respect. Inside, the church was cool and shadowed, the stained glass windows scattering colored light across the pews. The organist shuffled sheet music, pretending not to stare. Guests murmured behind hands and hymnals, and there, near the altar, stood my parents and Kyle. My mother's reaction was a silent avalanche. Her eyes widened, her complexion drained, her lips parted as if she were about to speak but had forgotten how. My father's jaw tightened until the muscles twitched at the edge. Kyle, who'd always been loudest, breathed out, "Holy hell," before he could stop himself. Heads snapped between him and me. Someone in the second row gasped. A veteran near the aisle whispered, "My God, those are command-level ribbons." Another murmured, "She outranks half the room." The realization moved through the congregation like a slow, stunned wave. Not only had my parents destroyed my dresses, they had never once told anyone who I actually was. My father's face lost all color. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Kyle's smirk vanished, replaced with something raw, unsettled, almost frightened. I walked slowly down the aisle, each step echoing off the old wooden floor like a quiet verdict. When I reached the front, I didn't bother looking at the audience. I looked only at my family. "This," I said quietly, tapping a single ribbon with my finger, "is what you tried to cut." My father flinched so visibly that several guests inhaled sharply. My mother stared at the floor as though it might swallow her whole. Kyle sank back a little, shoulders slumping in the first sign of shame I'd ever seen from him. The silence in the chapel was thick, electric, charged with a collective understanding that something sacred had been desecrated long before the dresses ever were. I kept my voice steady. Last night, all 4 of my dresses were cut apart, deliberately, with scissors. Gasps scattered across the pews. My tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. Truth doesn't shout. My father's lips parted, ready to deny, but before he could utter a word, a deep, commanding voice filled the chapel. David's father, retired Air Force, stood slowly from the second row. When he spoke, his voice rolled through the room like a warning bell. "That young woman," he said, pointing directly at me, "has given more to this country than most people here ever will, and she walked in after being humiliated by her own blood." The room went utterly still. "I won't pretend I understand your decisions," he continued, gaze fixed on my father, "but I know disrespect when I see it, and this," he motioned to my uniform, "is something you should have honored, not destroyed." My father's shoulders sagged, but my mother's breath hitched in a small, sharp sob she tried to swallow. Kyle looked like he wanted to disappear. And then, to everyone's surprise, my great-aunt Helen, a quiet woman who never interfered in family matters, pushed herself to her feet using her cane. "Child," she said, voice trembling with age but firm with conviction, "you stand tall. Don't let anyone dim what God lit bright in you." For the first time that morning, I felt my throat tighten. I inhaled slowly. "This wedding is going forward," I said calmly. "But I am not walking down the aisle with people who tried to sabotage my life less than 24 hours ago." A murmur spread across the room, understanding, agreement, even admiration. My father stiffened. "You can't exclude us," he hissed under his breath. I lifted my chin. "Watch me." Before he could respond, the chapel doors opened with a soft creak. A tall, silver-haired man stepped inside, Rear Admiral Thomas Caldwell, one of my earliest mentors, someone I had invited quietly, uncertain he would come. He walked down the aisle with the quiet authority of someone who had carried nations on his shoulders. When he reached me, his eyes softened. "Ma'am," he said gently, "do you have someone to walk you?" My breath caught. I shook my head. He extended his arm. "Then allow me." A soft cry escaped my mother. My father's posture crumbled. Kyle looked away, but I didn't waver. I placed my hand on the Admiral's arm, feeling the weight of decades of service under my palm. Before we turned toward the altar, I looked back at my parents, not with anger, but with something steadier. "You can stay," I said softly, "but you will not dictate my life anymore." The chapel inhaled as one. The organist, reading the moment perfectly, began the processional. The Admiral leaned in close enough for only me to hear. "Proud of you," he whispered. I blinked hard, holding everything inside with the discipline years in uniform had taught me. "Thank you, sir," I whispered back. We took the first step together, and for the first time in my life, I walked forward without waiting for anyone behind me. Walking with Admiral Caldwell down the aisle felt like stepping through a doorway between 2 different lives, one where I had spent years swallowing hurt to keep the peace, and one where I no longer needed to shrink to make anyone comfortable. The congregation rose as we approached, the stained glass windows casting warm colors across the pews like blessings I never expected to receive. For a moment, I forgot about the scissors, the whispers, the ruined silk. All I saw was David waiting at the altar, standing straighter than I'd ever seen him, eyes bright with something deeper than pride. When we reached him, the Admiral placed my hand gently in David's, nodded once with solemn respect, and took his seat among the guests. But the air behind me still buzzed, humming with the tension of my parents' shame. My mother sat trembling, fingers clutching a crumpled tissue. My father leaned forward, elbows on his knees, looking like a man struggling to breathe in a room filled with truth he couldn't outrun. Kyle stared at the floor, jaw tight, eyes glossy with guilt. Their presence sat heavily at my back, a reminder that even though I'd walked forward, the past wasn't done testing me. The officiant welcomed everyone, his voice calm, steady, trying to weave warmth into a morning that had been anything but gentle. He spoke about commitment, respect, and the courage it takes to choose love, and I saw my mother flinch at each word. My father's fingers twitched on his knee. Kyle swallowed hard. It was as if every phrase was a mirror held up in front of them, reflecting the things they didn't want to see. Still, the ceremony moved forward, and slowly the room softened. When David spoke his vows, his voice trembled with sincerity, promising partnership, protection, and a lifetime of choosing each other. My heart steadied. When I spoke mine, the words flowed with surprising ease, not fragile, not shaken, but grounded, because I was finally standing in a place built on truth. But just as the officiant lifted his hands and began the familiar line, "If anyone here has reason," a harsh scrape of wood filled the chapel as my father stood. My mother gasped. Kyle jerked upright. Whispers thundered across the pews like a storm rolling in. My father's fists clenched at his sides, and for a terrible moment, I thought he was going to erupt, lash out, rewrite the story one last time. David's grip on my hand tightened. The entire congregation held its breath. My father swallowed hard, Adam's apple bobbing like it hurt. His voice cracked open the heavy quiet. "I have something to say." The officiant stepped back. No one moved. Even the organist froze, hands hovering above the keys. My father stared at the floor as he spoke. I didn't raise her right. The words dropped into the silence like stones. My mother covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Kyle blinked rapidly, stunned. "We should have been proud," he continued. "We weren't. We didn't understand her choices, her strength." His breath shuddered. "So we punished her for it." A few people gasped softly. Others bowed their heads. My father took a long, painful breath. "Last night, that was the worst thing I've ever done. I thought tearing those dresses would make her small enough for me to understand." His voice cracked once, then again. "But she walked in here, and I have never felt smaller in my life." My mother broke then, not with the brittle, embarrassed crying from earlier, but with something raw and real. Tears spilled over as she whispered, "We were wrong. We were so wrong." Her shoulders curled inward, shame folding her in half. Kyle's voice followed, unsteady. "Dad told me to help," he muttered, face contorted with regret. "I was stupid. I'm sorry, sis. I'm so sorry." For the first time that morning, tears pricked at my eyes. Not because of the apologies themselves, but because I never expected them to come at all. Not here, not like this, not in front of everyone. I took a slow breath. "Thank you for saying that," I said quietly. My voice didn't shake. "But this isn't just about the dresses." The room held still. My father nodded, defeated. "I know." I met his eyes fully for the first time in years. It's about every moment before them. The years of being dismissed, overlooked, treated as less. My mother sobbed openly now, nodding in broken agreement, but I didn't step toward them. I didn't hold out my hands. I didn't offer comfort I didn't owe. Instead, I spoke the truth I needed for myself. "I'm not here to punish you," I said softly. "I'm here to break the pattern." A wave of approval moved through the room, older couples nodding, veterans straightening, women wiping their eyes. The air shifted, warmer now, lighter, like the walls themselves were exhaling. My father whispered, voice small, "I want to try." My mother grasped his hand. "So do I," she said. For the first time, I believed them, not because they suddenly became different people, but because truth had stripped away the armor they'd worn for decades. I turned to the officiant. "We can continue." His smile was soft and relieved as he resumed. The rest of the ceremony unfolded with a strange, beautiful calm. When he said, "You may kiss the bride," David cupped my face with a gentleness that steadied something deep inside me. Applause rose around us, not just for the marriage, but for the quiet revolution that had taken place in that chapel. The reception afterward was warm, emotional, almost reverent. Older veterans shook my hand with quiet pride. Women from the church hugged me with tears in their eyes. David's mother held me tight, whispering, "Families can learn, sweetheart, even the broken ones." I hoped she was right. I didn't approach my parents at first. I let them sit with the truth of what had happened. Eventually, Kyle approached, shoulders slumped, voice small. "I'm sorry," he said again, slower this time. "I should have stopped him." I nodded gently. "You could have," I said, "but thank you for saying it now." He let out a shaky breath, like someone who had been waiting years for a chance to be honest. My mother came next. Her eyes were red, makeup gone. She held my hands like something fragile. "I don't know if I can fix what I did," she whispered, "but I want to try." My chest softened, not into forgiveness, but into possibility. "Then try," I said, slowly, respectfully. She nodded, clutching my fingers as if they were a lifeline. "Anything," she whispered. My father was last. He didn't try to justify anything. He didn't name excuses. He just stood there, hands shaking, voice low. "I don't know how to undo what I've done," he said, "but I'll learn, if you let me." For once, his eyes held no anger, only regret. "We'll take it one step at a time," I told him, "but it has to be different." He nodded, eyes shining. "I'll make it different." Weeks passed, then months, and slowly, imperfectly, unexpectedly, they began to change. Counseling, long conversations, listening instead of dismissing. They learned about my rank, my deployments, the medals they'd ignored for years. My father even came to a ceremony honoring one of my junior sailors, standing quietly at the back, watching me with something that looked like new understanding. Kyle called more often. My mother wrote letters, real ones, vulnerable ones. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. One evening, months after the wedding, my father sat across from me at our kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee like it was something delicate. "I used to think strength meant control," he said quietly. "Now I know strength is standing your ground without crushing the people around you." I exhaled softly. "It took me years to learn that too," I told him. He nodded. "I'm glad you learned first," he said. "It saved all of us." Looking back, I don't think about the scissors or the dresses or the words, "You deserved it." I think about the chapel doors opening, the quiet gasp when the room saw my uniform, the truth spilling out like light through a cracked window. Families break, and sometimes, through truth, boundaries, and painful honesty, they rebuild into something better than before. Honor isn't just medals on a uniform. Honor is choosing integrity when anger would be easier. Honor is letting pain end with you, not pass through you. And if someone hearing my story feels their own heart crack open, wondering if their ending is already written, I hope they know this. It's never too late to rewrite the ending.